Hi everyone, my name is Josh. I'm the historian here at the Hayes Presidential, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Lucy Webb Hayes, so First Lady, wife of President Rutherford Hayes, and start by talking about her parents. So this portrait here, which we have in the Hayes bedroom where I'm standing, is of Maria Cook Webb. So she was from Chillicothe, Ohio, and she married Captain James Webb. He was actually from Kentucky, where he was born, and he served in the War of 1812, and actually, as rumor has it, crossed through this property here on his way to different battles. And he, as later after the war, became a physician, and then he moved to Chillicothe, where he met Maria. And so they marry, and they have 3 children. So they have James, they have Joseph, and then they also have Lucy. So Lucy was born August 28, 1831 in Chillicothe. And she grew up there primarily until 1844 when her mother moved the family to Delaware, Ohio, so that her 2 brothers could attend college at Ohio Wesleyan. Now, Lucy's father actually died in 1833 when she was only 2 years old. He was going down to Kentucky to care for his parents, and he contracted cholera. And actually his mother, his father, and his brother all died in this cholera epidemic. So like Rutherford, Lucy never actually knew her father. So while she was in Delaware, she actually met Rutherford Hayes, who was born in Delaware, was from there. And she was, this picture here, she's about 16 in this picture. So this is, she was actually 15 when she met Rutherford, but this is right around what she would have looked like at the time. And he was 24 in the image right over here on this wall. Here is what Rutherford looked like at the time, so he was 9 years older than her. And they met at the Sulphur Springs in Delaware. And Rutherford wrote that she was a bright, sunny-hearted little girl who was too young to fall in love with, and so I didn't. But they kept in touch, and they continued courting over time, and so they eventually become engaged in June of 1851, and when Rutherford confesses his love to her and proposes to her, she says to him, "Well, I must confess I like you very well." So it is a very happy, supportive marriage, 36.5 years, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that as we look around the different areas of the room. All right, this here we have is what Rutherford and Lucy looked like about 3 months after their wedding. So this was struck March of 1853. So they were married December 30th, 1852 in Cincinnati. Reverend L.D. McCabe was the one that officiated the service. And so after their wedding, by the way, Rutherford is 30 in this picture and Lucy is 21. So after their wedding, they honeymooned in Columbus with Rutherford's sister. And then later on, they had their first home in Cincinnati, Ohio. And funny enough, one of the stories is that after their first son, Bertrand, was born, on November 4th, 1853, they actually had to use his little silverware to eat their first meal in the house because they had actually forgotten to pack any silverware. So that's kind of funny to think of them doing that. Rutherford and Lucy had 8 children together. Only 5 survived into adulthood, sadly. And we have a picture here of the 5 that survived. So this up here is Rutherford, and here's Lucy around about 1877 when they go into the White House. You can see this sort of very beautiful royal purple background. And so the oldest son here, who I mentioned just a moment ago, is Bertrand. And Bertrand Austin Hayes, and then down here in the southwest corner we have Webb Cook Hayes the first, and he's important to the story here at the Hayes Presidential because he's the founder of the library, first presidential library in the nation, and he was also integral in preserving the collection here. And then over here we have Rutherford Platt, who was the 3rd son of Rutherford and Lucy, and he used to take pictures and develop them in this house. It's sort of interesting. And then up here we have the 2 little ones, Fanny, who's 9 in this picture, and Scott, who's 6. So they're the 2 that partly grew up in the White House together. So they lived there 4 years, and upstairs in the Hayes Presidential here in the Hayes house, we have Fanny's White House furniture, which is pretty impressive, big, beautiful black Eastlake furniture. One funny story about Rutherford Platt, so there's a letter where he talks about coming to visit his parents at the White House, but there were no beds, so he had to sort of sleep in the bathtub because at this time there are no east and west wings of the White House. It's just the core block that we see, from the famous pictures from Pennsylvania Ave. So it's kind of funny to think of one of their sons sleeping in the bathtub. Now, there are 3 children that didn't survive. We have Joseph on the bottom left, and then we have George up at the top here. This picture is called Babes Ascending, and this was named by a later director of the Hayes, but what this is showing is 2 of Rutherford and Lucy's children that didn't survive through their second summer. So Joseph actually went to visit his parents with his mother and brothers at the Civil War, where Rutherford was stationed at Camp White, and he contracted dysentery 9 days. And 9 days later, he died. And Lucy said the most bitter moment of her life is when she had to watch the little coffin going across the river to be for his burial in Cincinnati. And then little George at the top, he died in 1866 of scarlet fever. His oldest brother, Bertrand, actually brought it home from university, and the family got it, but George just didn't survive it. The Hayeses incidentally lost their mothers in 1866 too, within just a couple of months of each other, so it was a very hard year for the family. And then down on the bookcase here we have Manning Force, who was born in this house in 1873, and Rutherford said that he was always a sort of a sickly child. And then during his second summer in 1874, he died of what was called summer complaint, essentially dysentery. So when the heat would rise and the bacteria would start to accumulate in milk and things like that, that's not refrigerated, and the children would drink it, they could contract sort of a dysenteric illness from it. So very sad story, but again, at least they did have the 5 children that survived into adulthood. Well, next I'd like to talk a little bit about Lucy and Rutherford in the Civil War. So here is a picture of Rutherford as he would have looked while he was serving in the Civil War. So he rose to the ranks of Brevet Major General. He was in the Ohio 23rd Volunteer Infantry, fought all 4 years of the war, and was actually shot 5 times in battle, had 4 horses shot out from under him. Lucy used to come and visit him at the camps. So Camp White, Camp Reynolds, West Virginia, she would spend over 200 days in the camps with him. And she used to bring the sewing machine here, which is an 1850s Wheeler and Wilson, and she would use that to repair soldiers' uniforms and Rutherford's uniform, and she would make children's clothing on it. The soldiers of the Ohio 23rd loved her. They considered her the mother of the regiment. She wasn't only fixing their clothing, but she was also tending to their wounds or helping with them if they were ill, so she was nursing them as well. And in 1877, when Rutherford and Lucy go in the White House, it's their 25th anniversary, their silver wedding anniversary, and they decide to get remarried. And incidentally, they were remarried by the same reverend that married them the first time, so Reverend L.D. McCabe. But the soldiers from the 23rd Ohio actually came and they feted her at this celebration, and they made her a silver plaque. So they each melted down a silver coin and contributed it to this plaque. And on this plaque they wrote this little poem that talks about how grateful they were for her service to them, calling her their dear mother. And then there is also a little picture of the double log cabin that she and Rutherford and her 2 boys, Bertrand and Webb, were living at the time. So it's this beautiful plaque, a beautiful presentation, and a tribute to her service in the war. Pictured here over the mantle in the library of the Hayes home, we have this portrait of Lucy that was painted about 1871, and she's wearing her graduation robes from when she graduated from Cincinnati Female Wesleyan College. And she is the first lady to have a college degree, so she had a liberal arts degree. Another first for Lucy, she's also the first to actually officially be called First Lady in the newspaper. So famous journalist at the time, Mary Clemmer Ames, was at the Capitol inauguration on March 5th, 1877, and she noticed Lucy sitting next to her husband and noted how very conservative she sort of looked with the 2 bands of hair pulled back into the bun, and she wondered if the living in Washington society was going to puff out her hair and change her clothing and just make her more of the style of the time, and if it was going to change the first lady of the land. So that was the actual line that the other paper started to pick up on, and then Lucy becomes the first lady officially. She was known as a gracious White House host when she was in the White House. One thing that she's usually blamed for is banning alcohol in the White House. So you'll hear, maybe you've heard of her called Lemonade Lucy. That was a term that really we don't see show up until the 20th century in textbooks, although people may have been calling her that privately. Maybe that's where that comes from. We don't know for sure, but we don't believe she probably was being called that at the time. It was actually Rutherford's decision to ban alcohol in the White House. But Lucy would have been pleased by it because she was very much a temperance advocate. She had signed the temperance pledge to abstain from alcohol at a young age, influenced by her grandfather, Isaac Cook, who really becomes her father figure after her father dies. Lucy, though, she's also, you would think that things like abstaining from alcohol would be sort of this progressive notion, but Lucy was not a supporter of women's rights, interestingly. She believed, as she wrote, that a woman's intellect could be on the same plane or often higher than a man's, but she believed very much in the idea of the cult of true womanhood, or the cult of domesticity, this idea being that the woman's place was in the private sector. So you always hear angel, home, heaven, sort of like triumvirate of the mother at home, creating this idyllic atmosphere for the family, where the man goes out into the public sphere. He's the one that earns a living. He's the citizenship representation, so the vote representation for the family. So Lucy, again, very much believed in that. But she was a big supporter of anti-slavery. She was not officially an abolitionist, any evidence we can find on that, but she was definitely an anti-slavery advocate, and actually influenced Rutherford, who was an anti-abolitionist like his uncle Sardis, and she really influences him in a way that he starts defending runaway slaves, or these freedom-seeking people coming over the Ohio River into Ohio, trying to get their freedom, trying to maybe even get to Canada. Rutherford claims to have defended, excuse me, 30 to 40 runaway slaves. We have evidence of 2, but maybe in the future we will have more information on that. Lucy had a lot of health problems throughout her life. She suffered from bouts of rheumatoid arthritis from about the age of 20 on. She also had really severe migraines and probably some undiagnosed hypertension or high blood pressure that might have led to the stroke that killed her. So in church in 1889, she had had an episode where her left side was going numb and she couldn't stand. And it scared her enough for her to tell Rutherford what she wanted to have for her funeral. She sort of had this intimation that the end was on its way. And then actually in June of 1889, she's sitting in this chair, and her children are playing tennis out on the lawn, and a servant named Ella Graves is sitting next to her, and she and Ella are both sewing. And at one point, Ella looks over and notices that Lucy is kind of slumped in her chair, and she's staring fixedly at her sewing needle, and she's not responding when Ella calls to her. And so a doctor was called immediately. The children were called in from inside, and the doctor determined that she was having what was called an apoplectic stroke, so a massive stroke. So with the doctor's assistance, she's moved to this bed here, and Rutherford was actually just arriving from out of town. His son Rutherford Platt came and met him at the station, told him the bad news, and so they come here, and when Rutherford comes to her side, she sort of squeezes his hand and tries to smile, and over the course of just 3 days, she slowly slips away, and June 25th, 1889, she dies in this bed, so she's only 57 years old. Rutherford would talk about in his journal how the papers are writing how this is a beautiful house, a lot of beautiful things in it, but I realized that since Lucy's gone, the soul has really gone out of the house. So he's sort of lost without her. He lives 4 more years, has a heart attack on a Cleveland train station, January of 1893. And when his son Webb, who's with him at the time, asks him if he wants to get to a nearby house for medical care, he says, "No, I just want to. I'd rather die at Spiegel Grove than live anywhere else." And so he's brought back here. He's put in this bed as well, and he dies here 3 days later, January 17th, 1893. So what's I think really interesting about this bed is that this was given to them by Maria Webb, so Lucy's mother, as a wedding gift. So in some ways it's their wedding bed, it's also their deathbed. So it's like their whole marriage is sort of full circle in this one object. The President and First Lady are buried out on the grounds here at Spiegel Grove. And of course, the grounds are open to the public. You're always welcome to come out and visit the tombs where the President and First Lady are buried.